Today I want to talk about evangelicalism versus restoration of Israel, aka Zionism. Let me begin here in this way. How do you know that evangelicalism is on the right track or on the wrong track? Well, you have to begin with the promise of restoration for all Israel, as written in the prophets and as written by the Apostle Paul, Yehoshua, Messiah himself. For example, the Apostle Paul in Romans 11, verses 25 through 27, and it reads like this to the Romans: "For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the time of the Gentiles comes to the full," or comes to an end. "And so all Israel shall be saved, for out of Zion shall come the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob, because this is my covenant with them, when I shall take away their sins." It's undeniable. It is unshakable. It is unmovable. But unfortunately, folks, Christians, not the Jews, Christians today want to insert their own interpretation of that, and it is self-interpreted. You cannot add to it. You cannot take away from what Paul said in Romans 11, verses 25 through 27. You just can't do it. And the reason is written in verse 28 and 29, where Paul says, the Israelites might be your enemies, Romans, for your sakes, but for the patriarchs' sakes, they are the elect. Because the calling of Jehovah cannot be repented of, cannot be changed. Period. So, what I want to do today is read an article from Tablet Magazine, or tabletmag.com. Let me first make sure that I go to screen share, and we'll get started on this. The title was first of all, let's point out something here. The writer is a Jew, Samuel Goldman. And of course, like all Jews, or like most Jews, he is suspect of Christians' designs concerning Zionism, and rightly so. And in it, the title is "The Real Reason Americans Support Israel." Hint, it's not AIPAC. Now, of course, there was a big controversy that happened as a result of some Muslim member of Congress, new Muslim member of Congress, who claimed it was because of AIPAC that Americans support Israel. Well, I'm going to first of all tell you that it was from above. That support for Israel came, how is it, in Great Britain first, so that scripture would be fulfilled concerning the Balfour Declaration. Okay. It says the ships of Tarshish first. Now, the ships of Tarshish would be Spain, Portugal, etc. However, the British were also considered in the early days ports of Tarshish, the British coastlands. And of course, the ships of Tarshish went to the Americas, which that would be considered the young lions of Tarshish in Ezekiel 38. Okay? So prophecy would have to be fulfilled. It's not completely fulfilled. It just began at the point of the Balfour Declaration. It is unfortunate that during World War II that the British, after the Balfour Declaration, turned around in midstream and stopped the Jews from escaping the Nazis in World War II, blocked the door to the kingdom in Zion, and in so doing, when they took a hold of the plow, they looked back. Now, I want to point out something to you. Try to get this correctly. Looks back. Okay, Luke 9 and verse 62, Yehoshua, not Jesus, replied and said, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the service in the kingdom of Jehovah. Now, that covers a lot of territory, folks. It's not just, you know, talking about what the obvious is. What is obvious here? Now, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here, and right here in the little comment that says the not so secret history of Christian Zionism and its legacy by Samuel Goldman. In January of 2018, Vice President Mike Pence delivered an address at the Knesset to announce that the Trump administration's decision to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The speech was notable for not only for its occasion, but also for its symbolism. As a conservative evangelical, Pence represented a community of American Christians that forms the bedrock of American support for Israel and is arguably more enthusiastic about the Jewish state than many American Jews. I would agree with that. It is the figure of Pence and the millions of Americans he represents that was noticeably missing last week when Representative Ilhan Omar suggested that spending by the Jewish lobbyists was the source of America's special relationship with Israel. The new Democratic Congresswoman may have chosen her words carelessly in a glib tweet laced with anti-Semitic overtones, but the view she expressed is fairly common among critics of Israel. In short, it holds that the American-Israeli alliance is somehow unnatural and must be coerced through payouts and imposed by force on a reluctant populace. Thus, if lobbyist money dried up, so would the American support for Israel. But this belief is not only mistaken, it actually inverts the truth. In other words, it's the opposite of the truth. And so Mr. Goldman, he goes on, he digs deep, and he points out where American support for Israel comes from. Some of it is not in a good way. I'll show you. In fact, it is the broad American electorate rather than any narrow interest group that drives support for Israel. That is correct. This attitude is not principally motivated by money, but rather a sympathetic kinship that predates the creation of AIPAC by centuries. Addressing the Knesset, Pence's remarks were animated by the deep-rooted American Christian Zionism tradition. His speech went beyond a narrow political justification for the embassy move to draw a parallel between the American nation and the people of Israel. My country's very first settlers also saw themselves as pilgrims sent by Providence to build a new promised land, Pence explained. The songs and stories of the people of Israel were in their anthems, and that's true. And they faithfully taught them to their children, and do to this day. And our founders, as others have said, turn to the wisdom of the Hebrew Bible for direction, guidance, and inspiration. Pence then moved from history to prophecy. It was the faith of the Jewish people that gathered the scattered fragments of a people and made them whole again. He asserted that took the language of the Bible and the landscape of the Psalms and made them live again. The reference, as the vice president's audience certainly knew, was Ezekiel's so-called vision. It wasn't so-called, my friend. It was a real vision of the dry bones. And I talked about the true meaning of the vision of the dry bones and how if people would only read the next verses, they would have found the true meaning of the vision of the dry bones and would not pervert it as they do today. Anyway, I will continue. In the prophet's vision, desiccated human remains are reconstituted as living bodies of transformation that Jehovah reveals to be a foreshadowing of a reconstitution of the people of Israel. That is correct. It is unfortunate that Christians do not view this in the same way. But if they, once again, if they would continue to read afterwards, they would see that it is about the reconstitution of all Israel, period. End of subject. The speech was an impressive effort by the vice president, who is not known as an eloquent speaker. So it was not surprising when it transpired that Pence enjoyed the assistance of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks as a collaboration between an evangelical American politician and a British rabbi, delivered before Israel's parliament, delivered on behalf of the United States government. Pence's Knesset speech seemed to embody the special relationship the text affirmed. Yet, there's something I have to address here real quick, folks. I'm going to stop right here for a second. While at the same time, the administration that he is a part of introduces the peace plan of the century between the Philistines, the Palestinians, the Edomites, and Israel. As if this administration has any authority whatsoever in negotiating parcels of land that are not negotiable. This is the thing that really stirs my ire, and I will tell you, folks, those of you in the evangelical community know that it was Vice President Mike Pence who was the driving force behind the declaration as Jerusalem to be in the location of the American embassy. If Mike Pence were completely true to the truth, he would have said there is absolutely no negotiating of any of the land that is written in Joshua 1 verses 1 through 4. There can be negotiation. It is non-negotiable. He would have stood up and said, no, this land cannot be negotiated away, period. But he didn't. I will continue. Yet there remains something mysterious about the speech, as critics did not fail to note. Pence's remark glossed over serious disagreements between Christians and Jews, particularly in his repeated use of the word faith. Pence even appeared to subordinate Jewish views of the covenant to Protestant understanding of the conditions for salvation. This is exactly what I am talking about. This is the example of current, what do you call that? Supersessionism or replacement theology. How the church somehow replaces Israel. You see, folks, here's where the problem is. Christians just seem to can't get rid of supersessionism out of their lives, thinking that somehow that they are on top and Israel is on the bottom. Let me put it to you in a little different manner. in a way that most people cannot fathom today. This goes all the way back, I believe. I wonder which. Let's go to Shem. It's in Genesis 26. I mean, Genesis 9, verse 26 and 27. This is when the younger son committed a grave offense. Now, I know people will say that it was worse than what is written here. I'm not going to sit here and add to the scripture here. The offense that was committed when Ham saw his father drunk and naked in his own tent, rather than covering up his father himself, he tells his brothers about it, and they covered him up. See, if Ham would have done it, or Ham is how you, I can't pronounce Hebrew very well, so my apologies to the Jews for this. And if he would have never said anything about it, it would have been over and done with, and nobody would have gotten hurt. But no, he had to blabber his mouth to his brothers, making his father look bad, and his brothers did the right thing and covered him up. Okay, right here, verse 20. And Noah began to be a husbandman and planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunk and was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and then told his brethren outside. No, wrong move. You go grab a blanket, grab a cover, throw it over your dad, walk out, and don't say a word. Because of this, a curse came. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done unto him. People always try to say, well, he wouldn't have known if. You can't add or take away. You can't add or take away from this. You can't sit here and muse and think you want to add your 2 cents in here. It's written how it's written. And he said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall be unto his brother. Why did he curse Canaan rather than Ham? Maybe he didn't want all of Ham's children to be cursed. Anybody ever thought of that? Of which were also Egypt and Ethiopia, who were not under that curse, but only Canaan. And then he said, listen carefully, folks, verse 26. And this is where Roman Christianity today, and when I say Roman Christianity, do not fool yourself into thinking that evangelicalism is not a part of Roman Christianity. In fact, Orthodox Christianity is Roman Christianity, Roman Catholicism, regular Catholicism, evangelicalism, Methodism, Baptists, even the Amish and Mennonites, at least among the preachers, will say that they have their foundation in the Roman Church. So that covers all of them, even the JWs, because they are also rooted in the Roman Church. He said, blessed be Jehovah Elohim of Japheth. Is that what it says? No. Shem and Canaan shall be his servant. Jehovah will enlarge Japheth, and indeed he did. It covers all of Europe, the British, Spain, and all of Russia, and at one time even Turkey. That's a lot of territory. That's the vast majority of the territory on the earth. So but he will dwell in the tents of Shem. In other words, the blessings will have to come through Shem. Any blessing that Japheth gets has to come through Shem, and Canaan will also be Japheth's servants. So number 1 is Shem, number 2 is Japheth, number 3 is Ham. Now, the blessing of Shem, or the blessing of Israel, begins all the way from Shem. It says the Elohim of Shem, then you have the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not Japheth. But Roman Christianity today, it is the perversion of the scripture. They are trying to say they are on top, Japheth is on top, and the blessing of Shem is under their authority. No, that's backwards. When the Messiah comes, this is going to be turned all the way around on its head. If any of Japheth want salvation, they have to enter into the tents of Shem, which will be in Jerusalem. And they will have to, they cannot enter in as Israel being subpar to them. Just cannot, that does not work. So I will try to continue with this. Christian Zionism is considerably older than evangelical revival, which Pence is associated. Contrary to accounts that revolve around fire and brimstone preachers like Falwell, John Hagee, and apocalyptic writer Hal Lindsey, the idea that English-speaking Christians have a special responsibility to support and protect the Jewish state in some portion of the biblical Holy Land goes back to the beginning of the 17th century. In 1611, work titled Revelation of the Revelation, English scholar Thomas Brightman asked, "What shall they, the Jews, return to Jerusalem again?" You shouldn't even ask that question. That question should never have been asked to begin with. How can you, if the question has to be asked, then you're on the wrong side. Because not only are the prophets filled with the answer, so are the apostles and the words of Yehoshua himself. It is preposterous, it is perverse to ask such a question when the answer has already been told time and time again in the scripture. There is nothing more certain. The prophets do everywhere directly confirm it and beat upon it. Now, there should have been no reason for Thomas Brightman to ask the question, unless, of course, no Christian in his day believed it. And I would confirm that that would be the case. Thomas Brightman apparently was one of the only few who believed the truth. But he had to ask the question to put Christianity in their place. It's a shame that a question like that has to be even asked. What it means is the people whom he was dealing with were profane in their thinking of the Jews. Ten years later, the prominent lawyer Henry Finch insisted that we need not be afraid to aver and maintain that one day they shall come to Jerusalem again, Why in the world would he have to make this argument? They should have known. They didn't believe. Be kings and chief monarchs of the earth, sway and govern all for the glory of Christ that shall shine among them? No, for the glory of Moshiach that will shine, and glory that will shine among them. These arguments were products of emphasis on the plain speaking of Scripture and the theological significance of covenants that characterized Calvinism. Does that mean Calvinism was correct in the way they viewed things? Let's find out. Before the Reformation, most Christians read prophecies like Ezekiel's as allegories for the transformation of the carnal Israel descended from the patriarchs into the spiritual Israel represented by the church. And there lies your answer, folks. This is exactly what Roman Christianity believes to this day. Every single solitary denomination without exception believes this. Otherwise, if that were not so, then Israel would not have had the doors blocked to the kingdom in World War II. Israel would not have to be fighting to keep the land that they already have right now. In fact, if any large branch of Roman Christianity believed the truth concerning Israel and the kingdom, they would be pushing full throttle for all the land to be transferred to Israel, as written in Joshua 1, verses 1 through 4. But none of them do it. Calvin and his followers, by contrast, insisted that the allegorical interpretations were permitted only when literal ones made no sense. Well, I'm going to sit here and tell you right now, I can't think of any case where the literal interpretation makes no sense. I have pointed out how the translators, in many cases, deliberately mistranslated so it made no sense. There's all kinds of examples. There are hundreds of them. One of them is even the name of Jehovah. The people don't know the name of Jehovah because what they've done is they inserted the Lord instead. You cannot replace the name of Jehovah with the Lord. Okay, but why it was nonsensical to believe that the Jews might be reconstituted as a nation and returned to their own land. The editors of the so-called Geneva Bible, published in the late 16th century, were early contributors to the development of Christian Zionism. By adding explanatory notes to the margins, they codified Calvinist interpretations and disseminated them into the reading public. Especially in their notes on the prophets, they promote the idea of a geographic and a political restoration of Israel. The notes on Isaiah state that the Abrahamic covenant is perpetual, and Israel shall build again the ruins of Judea and Jerusalem. The note of Ezekiel 26 and verse 24 tells the glory of Judea when it shall be restored. Okay, this Calvinism contains a glaring flaw. The notes on Isaiah state that the Abrahamic covenant is perpetual. What they do not point out is that the old covenant between Jehovah and Israel died, just as Paul wrote about in Hebrews 8, verses 8 through 12, and the whole chapter, quite frankly. And he quoted Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34. But a new covenant. See, the problem is with Christians, they think that the new covenant belongs to them and not to Israel. They believe even the most Zionist of Christian groups do not want Israel to have the new covenant. They only refer to the old covenant. This is, to them, the old covenant. No, this is the new covenant. And this is how they get the idea that Christian evangelicals or Christians in general somehow supersede Israel, that Israel somehow keeps the old covenant, but the church has the new covenant. This is the best Christian Zionism can do. Well, I will tell you, folks, that is a falsehood. It is untruth. Israel has the new covenant. Israel will take hold of the new covenant, and if any Gentile wants to be a participant of the new covenant, they have to go through Israel to get there. They have to play second fiddle to Israel, just like Japheth, the father of the Greeks, the father of, as they say, white Europe, have to play second fiddle to Shem. Now, I probably said something that may have offended some people and made other people jump to wrong conclusions. The only difference between Shem and Ham might be the percentage light skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair. And the percentage difference is not very much. There were medium-skinned people among Japheth. There were light-skinned people among Japheth. There are medium-skinned people among Shem, and there were light-skinned people among Shem. The difference is not very much. I know the black folks who claim that they're Israelites when they're Ethiopian. You know, let's not get into this argument. It's not right. The notes on Isaiah states that the Abrahamic covenant is perpetual and Israel should build again the ruins of Judah and Jerusalem. The note on Ezekiel 26 foretells the glory of Judah when it shall be restored. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Jeremiah. Jeremiah? Yeah. Uh, 31. Go quickly. Behold, the days come, saith Jehovah, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Does not say the church. Does not say it. You can't read the church in it. You can't. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them out by the hand to lead them and bring them out of the land of Egypt. So this man's interpretation is incorrect. The new covenant, he's claiming, and this is what Christian evangelicalism in the United States believe. They believe that that same old covenant stays with Israel, and that the Christians, somehow enjoin with the new covenant. That's a falsehood. The Geneva editors and writers like Brightman, Finchen, or the Oxford University scholar Joseph Mead were not Zionists in the modern sense. They expected Jewish restoration to take place by miraculous means and to be closely related to Jewish conversion. Although they disagree about the precise sequence of events, their rediscovery of the authority of Scripture, however, led to a rediscovery of possibility of a Jewish state centuries before the emergence of the consolidation of a comparable movement among the Jews. In this sense, Christian Zionism can be seen as an ancestor of the real thing. As Pence hinted, Christian Zionism also played a role in the intellectual development of New England, and through its disproportionate influence of the United States, the Puritans of England added that the hermeneutic arguments of their Calvinist predecessors and intense identification with their own plight with the biblical Hebrews and a corresponding interpretation of their errand into the wilderness and for the exodus from Egypt. Puritan divines including John Cotton, Peter Bullocky, and Increase Mather, not only used the fulfillment of promises to Moses to remind their own followers of the rewards that awaits people who kept their covenant and obeyed God's law, but also held out hopes that the Jews would once again return home within a few generations. Cotton expected the emergence of a willing people among the Gentiles to convey the Jews into their own country with chariots, horses, and dromedaries. Now, this is correct, because it will be the duty of the Gentiles to do this, to return them home at the Gentiles' expense. Now, this word horses, as I have pointed out, can mean horses and it can mean airplanes. All you have to do is go look in the Strong's Concordance and you'll see it in the very first definition. Statements like Cotton's challenge an influential interpretation of American culture. According to this view, popularized by mid-century historians including Perry Miller and Ernst Tuvesen, the Puritans were the source of the belief that American Christians took over the Jews' role as God's chosen people in North America as a second Zion or a new promised land. This imaginative replacement, folks, that's dangerous, is said to lead to the conception of the United States as the Redeemer nation that holds the future of the human race in its hands. You can attribute everything from the Civil War to the struggle against communism to this vision. But there's also another version of the argument that's a bit more complicated. In this story, Americans in the United States do not replace the people and land of Israel. Rather, they are selected by, as it should read, Jehovah, to help realize biblical promises like the vision of the dry bones. As early as 1801, the Federalist politician Elias Boudinot wondered whether Jehovah has raised up these United States in these latter days for the very purpose of accomplishing his will in bringing his beloved people to their own land. That would be much better. This guy was getting closer to the truth. I would agree with that. But what he probably didn't realize is how many of those very people would be living in the United States in the latter days. But I digress. I will continue. In 1844, the New York University professor Herbert George Bush, an ancestor of the presidents, published a commentary on Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones. Rejecting arguments that the restoration of Israel had to wait for a miracle, he argued, when the Most High accordingly declares that he will bring the house of Israel into their own land, it does not follow that this will be affected by any miraculous interposition, which will be recognized as such. Well, that's some presumptuous talk. But anyway, I'll continue. It does not appear, therefore, that any special duty of Christians is involved in this predicted lot of Israel. Really? I beg to differ. Therefore, that any special duty of Christians is involved in this predicted lot of Israel, except so far as governmental action may be requisite in removing the political obstacles that stand in the way of the event. Well, Mr. Bush, whose members of the family helped the Nazis, Mr. Bush was incorrect in this. If he would have read Isaiah 60, he would see that it will be the responsibility of the Gentile nations to make the restoration of Israel happen. Many scriptures point this out. Dates are important here because they show that Christian Zionism precedes the influence of John Nelson Darby, the Anglo-Irish cleric whose theological system, known as Premillennial dispensationalism, is often described as a source of American Christians' special interest in Israel. Oh my, is it ever. And the Jewish people. Darby's ideas were certainly influential, especially in the simplified forms promoted by the Schofield Reference Bible, first published in 1909. But they found a receptive audience because many Americans already accepted their major claims. In any case, enthusiasm for the establishment of a Jewish state under American patronage did not require specific theological commitments. In 1891, the evangelist William E. Blackstone compared a petition calling on President Benjamin Harrison to help the Jews establish a state in Palestine, just as European nations like the Serbs or Bulgarians had done in the former Ottoman territory. Blackstone, a follower of Darby, but most of the signatories to this petition, which include leading politicians, industrialists, journalists, were not. And the text of the document appealed to humanitarian and strategic considerations far more than to eschatological ones. Almost 20 years later, in the midst of the First World War, Blackstone composed a second version of the petition for a presentation to President Wilson, endorsed by a prominent theological and political liberals. It may have played some role in Wilson's decision to affirm the Balfour Declaration. Mainline Protestants were the American Christians most closely associated with Zionism and the State of Israel from the 1930s until the Six-Day War. Although he was by no means the only figure associated with this nearly forgotten strand of liberal Christian Zionism, Reinhold Niebuhr was certainly the most prominent, a critic of the literal interpretation of the scripture that helped generate Christian Zionism in the 16th century. Niebuhr professed to be embarrassed when messianic claims are used to substantiate the right of the Jews to protect their homeland in Palestine, or when it is assumed that this can be done without injury to the Arabs. Well, it cannot be done without injury to the Arabs. In fact, it cannot be done without injury to the entire world if you would just read the scripture. Nevertheless, he insisted that America had providential responsibility to defend the peculiar historical miracle in the Middle East. Boy, he couldn't tell what side he was on now, could he? The problem is, this is where most American evangelicals, and I'll get to what I'm talking about here in just a minute. This is where most evangelicals in America stand. They don't believe, first of all, they may believe that Israel must be restored, maybe to the 67 borders, some of them more so. But many of them believe that there won't be injury to the Arabs and all the Gentiles as a result. Well, I'm telling you, there will be severe injury to the Arabs and all the Gentiles as a result. When I say all the Gentiles, I mean all the Gentile nations, not all individuals. One cannot know what is in the hearts of Christians enthusiasts for Israel. Their faith-based vocabulary and enthusiasm for a kind of Jewish kitsch can be offensive. And the action of certain figures in an organization, such as those who have supported, planned, or participated in disturbances at the Temple Mount, give ample reason for concern. But recognizing today's Christian Zionists as heirs to a significant theological tradition with deep roots in American political and religious culture is a step toward the emergence and consolidation with a more mature relationship between Jews and Christians, Israelis and Americans. In that respect, Pence's speech and the conversation it continues to provoke was a step in the right direction. Well, I'm here to tell you right now, folks, and I do appreciate Mr. Samuel Goldman for writing this article. It is very well written. But I'm here to tell you right now, it is impossible for the new covenant to be fulfilled without injury to the Arabs and the Christians. Why? Because both the Muslims and the Christians practice replacement theology, that somehow they replace Israel. Especially the Christians believe that Gentiles have the new covenant and the Israelites only have the old covenant, and it will stay that way. This is a very serious, severe error on the part of Christian theologians and believers alike. And if they would read the scripture, they would find out that they would be on the wrong side of history when Israel's Messiah returns. In fact, as I have pointed out many times, they're not looking for the Messiah. They're not looking for Israel's Messiah at all. What they are looking for is the Antichrist. This is what they're looking for. You know it, and I know it. They're looking for the Antichrist. This is the reason why it is written, when Messiah does return, all the tribes of the earth shall mourn. And it says the 10 toes are going of Europe. The Christian nations are going to come and fight against him. The false god that they worship, whom they call Jesus, is in fact the serpent, is in fact the devil. And they do what their father does. They have persecuted, murdered, pillaged, and raped the Jews for millennia. And no follower of Yehoshua would dare do such a thing. So by default, they are following the serpent. And they will do what is written in, I believe it's in, Revelation 12, down on the very bottom of Revelation 12, where when all Israel is gathered into her place for a time, times half a time, the serpent is going to be wroth with the woman and is going to send out a flood after her to try to stop her, to try to block the door to the kingdom once again, as they have done since the Balfour Declaration. But the earth is going to open up its mouth, as it is written in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and swallow up those armies. And then these nations, led by the man at the Vatican, are going to attack the two witnesses, make war against them, and kill them. I want to be perfectly honest with everyone. Roman Christianity today is on the wrong side of history. And when Israel's Messiah comes, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. It's all going to be written over everybody's faces. They're not going to serve him. Oh, no. They're going to come and fight against him. They are not going to. I'm telling you, folks, this whole thing, like this peace plan of the century, if Vice President Mike Pence were true to the truth, he would absolutely reject this. It is an offense in so many ways, and one of the offenses is to put two Jews up to dividing the land in Israel in negotiation when the land could never be negotiated. In any sort of peace agreement, the land can never be negotiated. To hide behind the Jews is a horrible offense. He should have walked out of the administration. If he was true to the truth, he would have walked out and say, I reject this peace deal of the century entirely. Now we see that Jared Kushner has announced a couple days ago that that this peace deal is going to be announced after the Israeli election. And the Israeli election is on the Roman calendar April the 9th, which is just before Pesach, or Passover. I find that interesting. So, first of all, get out of your heads that somehow the Antichrist, as the evangelicals claim, is going to make some kind of a peace deal with Israel. That is taking Daniel 9 and verse 27 completely out of context. That situation already happened. It was Titus the Roman general that Daniel 9 and verse 27 talks about. And to claim that that's not the truth is to claim it is delusional, because it is written in history. So the real peace agreement, the real one, is going to be between Israel's Messiah and Israel. And Israel's Messiah is going to offer peace to the Gentiles. He's going to tell them, this is my land, go home and live. But if you come to fight against me, you're going to die. Says he's going to speak peace to the Gentiles. He's going to offer them peace, and they're going to reject it. So please watch, because events are happening fast.